The Roman Empire is not just history. It is a memory carved into the foundations of Western civilization. Few names in human history carry the same resonance as Rome. Empires have risen and fallen. Kings and nations have passed into dust, yet Rome remains. Even its ruins feel alive, a reminder that power, glory, and human ambition can transcend centuries. But Rome's story is not a simple one of conquest and decay. It is a tapestry woven from myth, war, innovation, and resilience. At its height, Rome controlled territory from the Atlantic Ocean to the deserts of Arabia, from the Scottish Highlands to the Nile Valley. Its legions marched further than any Mediterranean power before it. Its language gave birth to others. Its laws shaped systems that govern nations to this day. And yet, despite all this, Rome fell. Slowly, painfully, almost unthinkably. To understand why Rome rose so high and why it eventually crumbled is to confront some of the most enduring questions of human history. How do small beginnings lead to world-shaping powers? How does ambition both build and destroy? Can any empire truly last forever? This is not just the story of a city. It is the story of power itself, how it is gained, how it is kept, and how, inevitably, it slips away. The fascination with Rome, there is a reason Rome continues to live in popular imagination. Even today, you'll hear people ask, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? The question, at first, seems humorous, yet it reveals something deeper. Rome represents the pinnacle of human achievement and the inevitability of human fragility. We marvel at its aqueducts, which carried water across valleys with precision so advanced that modern engineers still study them. We marvel at its roads, so well built that some still exist 2,000 years later. We marvel at the Colosseum, a stadium that could seat 50,000 spectators and operate with retractable awnings and underground machinery. And yet, alongside this awe, we feel the warning. Rome shows us how even the most enduring structures of stone, of government, of society can collapse under the weight of time, corruption, and change. Perhaps that is why Rome lingers in our thoughts. It is both an inspiration and a caution. The roadmap of an empire to tell Rome's story, we must walk through its full arc, from humble beginnings on the banks of the Tiber River to its triumphant empire, and finally to its slow unraveling. We begin with myth. Rome's origins are rooted in legend, the tale of Romulus and Remus, twin brothers raised by a she-wolf, fighting for power over a new city. Beneath the myth, archaeology reveals a settlement well-placed for survival and growth. This is the story of how Rome moved from kingship to republic and why its system of checks and balances carried both strength and seeds of collapse. We move to the republic's crisis. Wealth, conquest, and ambition led to internal fractures. Out of this chaos emerged Julius Caesar, a man whose brilliance and ambition forever changed the course of history. His rise and assassination revealed the Republic's inability to contain power. We watched the birth of an empire. Under Augustus, Rome found stability again. He was careful to present himself as a first citizen rather than a king, but his reign marked the true beginning of imperial rule. With the Pax Romana, Rome reached its golden age. We explored daily life. The strength of Rome was not only in its armies, but in the lives of its people. From villas to insulae, from gladiatorial games to Roman religion, we glimpsed the world as Romans lived it. We witnessed a crisis and a fall. The 3rd century brought economic troubles, foreign invasions, and political instability. Emperors rose and fell with alarming speed. In the West, Rome weakened until finally, in 476 CE, the empire collapsed. Yet in the East, Byzantium carried the torch for another 1,000 years. And finally, we reflect on Rome's legacy. Its language, its law, its architecture, and its cultural memory will continue to shape the world. This is the path we will take. And through it, we will not only hear dates and names, but stories of soldiers and senators, of emperors and commoners, of triumphs and mistakes. The weight of myth and memory. Before diving into the Republican Empire, it is worth pausing on one truth. History is always a balance of fact and memory. The Romans themselves told stories about their origins that blended myth and reality. When they spoke of Romulus, they were not just remembering a legendary king. They were telling themselves who they were, children of both gods and mortals, destined to rule. This blending of fact and myth became one of Rome's enduring tools of power. Later emperors would claim divine ancestry, tracing their lineage back to Aeneas or even the goddess Venus herself. Architecture would speak in the language of eternity, marble temples and triumphal arches designed to remind citizens that Rome was not just a city, but an idea. Even in its decline, Rome's memory was so powerful that medieval kings, Renaissance artists, and modern nations sought to claim its legacy. The Holy Roman Empire of the Middle Ages was neither holy, Roman, nor truly an empire, but the name itself shows how enduring Rome's prestige was. Why Rome's story still matters in every age. Rome has offered a mirror to those who study it. For the founding fathers of the United States, Rome's republic was both a model and a warning. For dictators in the modern world, Roman emperors provide lessons in both how to seize power and how to lose it. For ordinary people, Rome inspires awe and curiosity. And for historians, Rome is a reminder of cycles. Civilizations grow, flourish, and fall. Yet they leave behind legacies that ripple forward. Rome's legacy is not only its ruins or Latin words in modern speech. It is also the enduring question: can any empire escape Rome's fate? And so, we begin our journey. From the shadow of legend to the grandeur of empire, and finally to decline, Rome's story spans over 1,000 years. It is a story of ambition, discipline, innovation, and fragility. Rome was not built in a day, nor did it fall in one. Let us walk together through the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. The beginning. From myth to republic, the legendary origins. The Romans told themselves a story that began far from Italy, across the sea in Asia Minor. When Troy fell to the Greeks, a Trojan prince named Aeneas fled the ruins. Carrying his father, Anchises, upon his shoulders and holding the hand of his young son, Aeneas became the living image of pietas, duty to family, gods, and future generations. After years of wandering, Aeneas reached the shores of Italy. There, he founded a line that centuries later would produce the twins Romulus and Remus. Abandoned as infants on the banks of the Tiber, the twins were rescued by the most unlikely of mothers, a she-wolf. The animal suckled them in her den at the foot of the Palatine Hill until a shepherd, Faustulus, discovered the boys and raised them as his own. When grown, the brothers sought to found a city of their own. But in a tragic quarrel over its location, Romulus slew Remus. From fratricide, Rome was born. For Romans, this story mattered. It told them that their city was destined, blessed by the gods, and born out of sacrifice. The tale of Romulus, Remus, and Aeneas was less history than identity, a reminder that Rome's greatness was inevitable. Archaeology. Behind the legend, beneath the myth, lies archaeology. Excavations on the Palatine Hill reveal traces of huts dating to the 8th century BCE, the very era the Romans placed their founding, around 753 BCE. These huts were simple dwellings, made of wattle and daub, their roofs thatched, their hearths central. Rome at first was no grand city, but a cluster of hilltop villages overlooking a ford on the Tiber. Yet this location was key. It gave access to trade routes, fertile plains, and defensible high ground. Nearby people shaped these early Romans: the Latins, Rome's linguistic kin; the Sabines, from whom the Romans adopted rituals and wives; the Etruscans, a more advanced northern people whose kings, cities, and symbols deeply influenced Rome. From the Etruscans came the purple toga of kings, The curved fasces carried by lictors as symbols of authority, and even the gladiatorial combat that would later fill Roman arenas. Rome, from its birth, was not an isolated invention. It was a mosaic forged from what it absorbed. The Age of Kings, 753 to 509 BCE. Roman tradition spoke of 7 kings, each remembered not just for rule, but for shaping the foundations of Rome. Romulus, 753 to 717 BCE, founder, warrior, and lawgiver. He organized Rome into tribes and created the Senate, a council of 100 elders to advise the king. Numa Pompilius, 717 to 673 BCE, a Sabine known for peace and piety. He was said to have established priesthoods, temples, and sacred rites. Under him, Rome became not just a city of warriors, but of rituals. Tullus Hostilius, 673 to 642 BCE, a king of war. His reign was marked by conflict, including the legendary combat of the Horatii and Curiatii, triplets who fought on behalf of Rome and Alba Longa. Ancus Marcius, 642 to 617 BCE, builder and administrator. He fortified Rome's first port at Ostia and constructed bridges over the Tiber. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, 616 to 579 BCE, the first Etruscan king of Rome. He expanded Roman territory and began great building projects, including the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's first sewer. Servius Tullius, 578 to 535 BCE, said to be born a slave, he rose to kingship. He introduced the first census, dividing Romans into classes based on wealth, tying citizenship to military service. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, 535 to 509 BC, Tarquin the Proud, remembered as a tyrant. He ruled without consent, silenced dissent, and expanded his power at the people's expense. It was under Tarquin that the monarchy collapsed. His son Sextus Tarquinius violated the noblewoman Lucretia. Her suicide became a rallying cry for freedom. Outraged citizens, led by Lucius Junius Brutus, drove out the Tarquins. Kingship was abolished forever. The birth of the Republic, 509 BCE. Rome reinvented itself. No single man would hold power again. Instead, power was divided and time-limited. At the top stood 2 consuls, elected annually. Each had equal power. Each could veto the other. Around them stood other magistrates, from praetors to quaestors, each with defined roles. The Senate, now composed of patrician families, became the true guiding hand. Its authority was not written law but tradition and prestige, what the Romans called auctoritas. The people had their say in assemblies, voting on laws and electing magistrates. Yet voting power was weighted in favor of the wealthy. Rome was no democracy. It was an oligarchic republic, but its design was deliberate. By dividing power, the republic sought to prevent tyranny. Rome's motto became SPQR, Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome, the struggle of the orders. Yet beneath this system lay deep inequality. The patricians, old aristocratic families, monopolized offices and influence. The plebeians, farmers, artisans, and soldiers demanded rights. Their struggle, known as the conflict of the orders, spanned centuries. Through strikes, protests, and secession from the city, the plebeians won key victories. The creation of the office of tribune of the plebs, for 194 BCE, officials who could veto laws harmful to the people. The publication of the 12 Tables, for 151 to 450 BCE, Rome's first written laws, displayed publicly so justice could no longer be hidden. The eventual right for plebeians to hold consulship and even intermarry with patricians. Step by step, the plebeians forced Rome toward greater equality. Yet Rome never erased class divisions. Instead, it fused them into a complex, competitive society where ambition and rivalry drove politics forward. Wars of early Rome. The young republic was not secure. Rome's neighbors, the Latins, Sabines, Etruscans, and Volscians sought to check its rise. Legends tell of heroic stands. Horatius Cockles, who held a bridge against an Etruscan army, bought time for the Romans to destroy it behind him. Wounded, he leapt into the Tiber and swam to safety. Mucius Scaevola, who, captured by the enemy, thrust his right hand into a fire to show Roman resolve. From then on, he was called Lefty. Coriolanus, a Roman general who, after exile, joined the Volscians to attack Rome, only to be persuaded by his mother to spare the city. These tales were not just stories, but lessons. They taught Romans that bravery, sacrifice, and loyalty to the state were virtues above life itself. By the 4th century BCE, Rome had defeated its Latin rivals, subdued the Etruscans, and expanded across central Italy. Its power was growing, step by step. Religion and the sacred order. For early Romans, religion was not separate from politics or war. It was woven into every action. They believed the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, was essential for success. Before battles, augurs read the flight of birds, and priests examined entrails for omens. Every oath, law, and treaty was sworn under divine witness. Temples rose on Rome's hills. The temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline, the hearth of Vesta where sacred fire burned, the shrines of Mars, Venus, and countless household gods. Religion, for Rome, was not about faith but about duty. Rituals performed correctly, gods honored properly, balance maintained. This discipline in religion mirrored Rome's discipline in law and war. Moral tales of the Republic. Romans shaped their identity through stories of self-sacrifice. Cincinnatus, a farmer who, when appointed dictator in crisis, led Rome to victory and immediately returned to his plow. He became the model of the citizen soldier. Brutus, who drove out the Tarquins and executed even his own sons for plotting their return, putting the Republic above family. Such stories, whether fact or embellishment, were moral lessons, constantly retold to remind Romans what made their city strong: duty, discipline, and loyalty to the state. The Republic's paradox. By the late 5th century BCE, Rome was no longer a fragile settlement but a rising republic, its armies disciplined, its laws codified, its people bound together by tradition. The Republic was designed to resist tyranny. It's a very structured, balanced power, divided authority, and demanded accountability. But this balance contained tension. Rivalry between patricians and plebeians, between senate and people, between ambition and restraint, never disappeared. These rivalries drove Rome's expansion and innovation, but they also sowed the seeds of conflict that, centuries later, would destroy the Republic itself. Julius Caesar and the Republic's collapse. When we left Rome in its early days, the Republic had established itself as a formidable power. It was not a democracy in the modern sense, but it carried an ideal: no single man should dominate Rome again. For centuries, this system had worked imperfectly, but effectively enough to transform a small city-state into the master of the Mediterranean. Yet, by the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, that balance began to collapse. Wealth, ambition, and inequality cracked the very foundations of the Republic, setting the stage for a figure whose name would echo for millennia: Gaius Julius Caesar. The expanding Republic. Rome's rise was built on conquest. Wars against neighbors in Italy, then the titanic struggles against Carthage in the Punic Wars, had left Rome supreme. By the middle of the 2nd century BCE, Rome controlled Spain, North Africa, Greece, and much of Asia Minor. Victory brought enormous wealth, but it was wealth that flowed into the hands of the elite. Senators and generals acquired vast estates, worked by imported slaves. Ordinary Roman farmers, once the backbone of the Republic's citizen soldier army, often lost their land and migrated to the city. There, they became part of the urban poor. The plebs, who lived in crowded tenements and relied on cheap grain to survive. The Senate remained dominated by the aristocratic patricians, but voices of reform began to emerge. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, tried to redistribute land and curb corruption in the 2nd century BCE. Both were killed, victims of political violence that revealed how fragile Rome's republican system truly was. Ambition and the rise of generals. By the 1st century BCE, Rome's wars brought not just wealth, but opportunity for ambitious military leaders. Generals commanded not just armies, but loyalty. Soldiers began to see themselves less as servants of the state and more as followers of their commander, who could reward them with land, loot, or citizenship. Two such figures, Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, clashed in a brutal civil war. Sulla even marched his legions into Rome itself, breaking a taboo that had held since the city's founding. Though Sulla retired after dictatorial rule, his actions shattered the precedent. The Republic's laws could be bent, even broken, by force of arms. This was the world into which Julius Caesar rose. A Rome teetering between tradition and ambition. The making of Julius Caesar. Born in 100 BCE into the patrician Julii family, Caesar's early life was marked by both privilege and danger. His family claimed descent from Venus through Aeneas, linking them to Rome's mythical origins. But politics were perilous. During Sulla's dictatorship, Caesar was targeted for his connections to Marius's faction. He was stripped of property and forced into hiding, refusing to divorce his wife Cornelia despite Sulla's demand. Only after Sulla's death did Caesar safely return, a decision that foreshadowed his lifelong defiance of authority when principle or ambition demanded it. He rose through the political ranks, serving as a military officer, a lawyer renowned for his oratory, and eventually as Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest. Yet it was through military conquest that Caesar would secure immortality. Gaul and glory. In 58 BCE, Caesar took command in Gaul, modern-day France and Belgium. Over nearly a decade, he conducted one of history's most brilliant campaigns. Facing diverse tribes, shifting alliances, and immense logistical challenges, Caesar expanded Rome's borders to the Atlantic and the Rhine. He recorded his campaigns in the Commentarii de Bello Gallico, Commentaries on the Gallic War, a masterpiece of propaganda and history. In clear, direct Latin, Caesar depicted himself as the calm, rational commander against chaotic, barbarian foes. These writings were not just reports. They were weapons, shaping his reputation in Rome even as he fought abroad. By the time Gaul was subdued, Caesar commanded a veteran army fiercely loyal to him personally. He had wealth, glory, and popularity among the people. But in Rome, the Senate and its rivals saw danger. The first triumvirate. Earlier, Caesar had allied with two powerful men, Pompey the Great, Rome's celebrated general, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome. This informal pact, known as the First Triumvirate, allowed them to dominate Roman politics. But alliances built on ambition rarely endure. Crassus died in 53 BCE during a disastrous campaign against the Parthians. Pompey, once Caesar's ally and even his son-in-law, drifted toward the Senate's side, growing wary of Caesar's rising power. When Caesar's command in Gaul ended, the Senate ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. To obey meant political ruin, perhaps even prosecution. To refuse meant rebellion. Crossing the Rubicon. In January 49 BCE, Caesar made his choice. At the small river Rubicon, which marked the boundary of his province, he paused. To cross with his army was treason. To turn back was surrender. According to tradition, he declared, Alia iacta est, the die is cast, and he led his legions across. Civil war erupted. Pompey and many senators fled to Greece, while Caesar swept through Italy unopposed. He secured Spain, then pursued Pompey across the Adriatic. At the decisive Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Caesar's smaller, disciplined force crushed Pompey's larger army. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge, but was assassinated upon arrival. Caesar followed, entangling himself in Egyptian politics and forming a famous liaison with Queen Cleopatra VII. Dictator for life. Returning to Rome, Caesar assumed supreme power. He pardoned many former enemies, seeking to appear as a unifier rather than a tyrant. He launched reforms, granting citizenship, reorganizing debts, and initiating vast building projects. But his dominance was undeniable. In 44 BCE, the Senate named him Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. For conservatives who still clung to the ideals of the Republic, this was intolerable. The Ides of March. On March 15, 44 BCE, the Ides of March, a group of senators led by Brutus, Cassius, and other conspirators struck. As Caesar entered the theater of Pompey, he was surrounded and stabbed 23 times. Ancient accounts claim his last words were "Et tu, Brute?" though historians debate this detail. The conspirators believed they were saving the Republic from monarchy. Instead, they unleashed further chaos. Caesar's death removed a man of extraordinary control, leaving behind a power vacuum and his adopted heir, Octavian, waiting in the wings. The Republic's final collapse. The aftermath of Caesar's assassination revealed a bitter truth. The Republic was already too broken to save. Civil wars erupted again, pitting Caesar's supporters against his assassins. In time, Octavian would emerge victorious, taking the title Augustus and reshaping Rome into an empire. Caesar's life symbolized both the Republic's brilliance and its downfall. He was a military genius, a populist politician, a reformer, and a man whose ambition could not be contained by Republican tradition. Why Caesar matters. To study Caesar is to study the fragility of institutions. Rome's republic had endured for centuries, but under the pressure of inequality, ambition, and military power, it collapsed. Caesar did not create these problems, he exploited them. His story resonates even today. How do societies balance personal ambition with collective good? How do republics guard against the concentration of power? How does charisma bend law to its will? These were Rome's questions, and they remain ours. Augustus and the birth of the empire. When the blade of Brutus struck Caesar on the Ides of March in 44 BCE, the Roman Republic, already shaken by decades of civil war, entered its final act. The senators who killed Caesar believed they were restoring liberty, but instead, they unleashed yet another cycle of bloodshed. The Republic, weakened by corruption and factional strife, was too fragile to survive without a figure of overwhelming authority. Into this chaos stepped a young man who would reshape the world, Gaius Octavius, better known to history as Augustus. The heir of Caesar. Octavian was only 18 when Caesar was murdered. He was not an obvious successor, a thin, sickly youth, more bookish than martial, with little battlefield experience. Yet Caesar had seen potential in his great-nephew, adopting him in his will and naming him his heir. This was more than inheritance. It was a political weapon. To the people of Rome, Octavian was now Julius Caesar's son in name and legacy. Octavian acted swiftly. With calculated caution, he sailed from Illyria to Italy and declared himself Caesar's rightful heir. Many dismissed him as too young to matter. Cicero, the famed orator, sneered at him as a boy who should be praised, honored, and then discarded. But they underestimated him. Octavian possessed something rarer than brute strength. He understood the value of patience, alliances, and timing. The struggle for power. Rome, in the aftermath of Caesar's death, was divided among three powers: the Senate, led by Cicero, and the assassins, Brutus, Cassius, claimed to defend the Republic. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general and consul, controlled the military forces in Rome. Octavian, untested but armed with Caesar's name, his fortune, and the loyalty of many veterans. Initially, Octavian played the Senate against Antony, posing as the defender of Roman liberty. He raised his own army from Caesar's veterans, exploiting their loyalty to his adoptive father. Soon, however, it became clear that the Republic's defenders were weak. The Senate could not command real power, and Antony was too strong to ignore. By 43 BCE, Octavian forced the Senate to grant him legal authority. Then, in a remarkable turn, he allied with his supposed enemy Antony, along with Marcus Lepidus, to form the Second Triumvirate, a three-man dictatorship sanctioned by law. Their mission: to avenge Caesar. The war against the liberators. The triumvirs wasted no time. They unleashed brutal prescriptions, publishing lists of enemies whose lives and properties were forfeit. Cicero, who had mocked Octavian as a child, was hunted down and executed. Thousands were killed. Their wealth was seized to fund armies. Rome had seen political purges before, but never on this scale. In 42 BCE, the triumvirs confronted Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in Greece. The assassins of Caesar were crushed, both taking their own lives. The dream of restoring the Republic died with them. But the alliance between Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus was fragile. The three divided Rome's territories among themselves. Antony took the east, Lepidus Africa, and Octavian the west. Soon, ambition and rivalry began to tear them apart. Antony and Cleopatra. Antony, ruling from the east, became entangled with the Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra VII. She had once been Caesar's lover and now was allied with Antony, offering him wealth and naval power. To many Romans, this looked like betrayal. Antony was accused of becoming a slave to the Eastern Queen, dreaming of ruling Rome from Alexandria. Octavian seized the moment. In Rome, he launched a propaganda campaign painting Antony as un-Roman, seduced by luxury, and plotting to crown Cleopatra queen over Rome. Octavian claimed to be the defender of Roman tradition, while Antony was cast as a traitor to the Republic. The conflict came to a head at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Octavian's admiral, Agrippa, outmaneuvered Antony and Cleopatra's fleet. Their forces scattered, and the lovers fled to Egypt. Within a year, both would be dead. Cleopatra by the bite of an asp, Antony by his own sword. With their deaths, Octavian stood alone as master of the Roman world, the first emperor. In 27 BCE, Octavian took the title Augustus, meaning the revered one. It was a title chosen carefully. He avoided Caesar's mistake of openly grasping at kingship. Instead, Augustus cloaked his power under the old forms of the Republic. He styled himself not as a monarch, but as princeps, first citizen. In reality, Augustus controlled everything. He commanded the armies, the treasury, the provinces, and the Senate bent to his will. Yet he did so with subtlety. He presented himself as the savior of Rome, the man who had ended civil wars and restored peace. Romans, weary of decades of bloodshed, accepted him. Thus was born the Principate, a system that looked republican but functioned as a monarchy. Augustus was the first emperor of Rome. The Pax Romana, Rome at peace. The reign of Augustus ushered in the Pax Romana, 2 centuries of relative stability. For the first time in generations, Romans could live without fear of civil war. Augustus reorganized the army, stationing legions in permanent frontier bases. He reduced the number of soldiers, ensuring loyalty by granting them land and pensions. The legions no longer belonged to ambitious generals. They belonged to Augustus alone. He reformed the provinces, rooting out corruption. Governors were monitored, tax collection standardized, and roads expanded. These roads stretched across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East, arteries binding the empire together. Roman law and administration spread, creating a sense of unity across lands as diverse as Gaul, Spain, Egypt, and Judea. Economically, Augustus stabilized currency, encouraged trade across the Mediterranean, and promoted agriculture. Grain from Egypt fed the people of Rome, olive oil from Spain lit lamps, and silks from the east flowed into the markets. Building Rome in marble. Augustus was not only a politician but also a patron of culture. He boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He sponsored great building projects. The Forum of Augustus, with its Temple of Mars altar, celebrates vengeance for Caesar. The Era Pacis, the altar of peace, is decorated with reliefs glorifying the harmony of the empire. The expansion of aqueducts brought fresh water into Rome's growing population. Art and literature flourished under his rule. Poets like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid thrived in his patronage. Virgil's Aeneid, written during Augustus's reign, told the story of Aeneas, linking Rome's destiny to divine will and Trojan heroism. It became Rome's national epic, legitimizing Augustus's rule as part of a grand, cosmic plan. Social reforms and family values. Augustus understood that an empire could not survive on power alone. He tried to reshape Roman society itself. He passed laws encouraging marriage and childbearing, fearing the decline of traditional family values. Adultery was punished harshly. Even his own daughter, Julia, was exiled for scandalous behavior. These laws revealed Augustus' desire to present himself not only as ruler, but as moral guardian of Rome. Religion, too, was reshaped. Augustus revived ancient priesthoods, rebuilt temples, and promoted the worship of Rome's gods. Yet at the same time, he subtly introduced the imperial cult, the worship of the emperor himself as a divine figure. In life, Augustus was first citizen. In death, he was declared a god. The succession question. Despite his power, Augustus faced one problem he could not solve: succession. The Republic had fallen because one man held too much authority. Now the empire depended entirely on him. Who would follow? Augustus had no sons of his own. He carefully arranged marriages, grooming heirs among his relatives and generals. Yet fate was cruel. His chosen heirs died young, one after another. In the end, the throne passed to his stepson, Tiberius, a capable general but dour and unpopular. This uncertainty revealed the fragility of the system Augustus had built. He had created stability for his lifetime, but at its core, the empire still depended on the character of one man. The legacy of Augustus. When Augustus died in 14 CE at the age of 75, he left behind more than an empire. He left a model of governance that would endure for centuries. His reign marked the transition from republic to empire, from chaos to order. Under him, Rome reached its golden age, politically, militarily, and culturally. The Pax Romana allowed Rome to dominate the Mediterranean world, and its influence spread far beyond its borders. Yet Augustus's achievement was double-edged. By concentrating power in one man, he ensured peace but destroyed freedom. The Senate became a hollow shell, and the Romans slowly forgot the ideals of the Republic. Empire brought glory, but at the cost of liberty. Still, in the eyes of history, Augustus remains one of the most remarkable leaders the world has ever seen. His vision transformed Rome from a fractured republic into the greatest empire of the ancient world. When we speak of the Roman Empire, it is Augustus we must remember. Caesar may have shattered the republic, but Augustus built the system that endured. He was not simply Rome's first emperor. He was Rome itself, reborn in marble, law, and legend. The Pax Romana was his greatest gift, and yet also his greatest paradox: peace through absolute power. In the story of Augustus, we see the eternal tension between liberty and order, ambition and restraint, mortality and immortality. And it is here, in his reign, that the Roman Empire truly began. The Roman army and daily life. If there was one institution that defined Rome, one force that carried its banners from the forests of Germania to the deserts of Syria, from the misty isles of Britannia to the sands of North Africa, it was the Roman army. But behind the clashing of swords and the thunder of shields lay another Rome, one of crowded streets, bustling marketplaces, grand baths, temples filled with incense, and amphitheaters echoing with cheers. To understand Rome fully, we must walk in the sandals of both soldier and citizen. The machine of empire, the Roman army. The Roman army was more than a military. It was an engine of empire. No civilization before Rome had mastered the art of organizing men into such an effective fighting machine. By the late Republic and into the empire, the legion stood as Rome's most feared and enduring creation. A Roman legion typically numbered about 5,000 men, divided into cohorts and centuries. Each century, led by a centurion, was a unit of around 80 soldiers. These centurions were the backbone of discipline, known for their strictness, scarred bodies, and ability to maintain order in the harshest of conditions. They carried vine staffs as symbols of authority, often using them liberally on disobedient soldiers. Unlike many armies of the ancient world, Rome's legions were not temporary levies raised for a single campaign. They were professional soldiers, bound to 20 years of service, trained not just in combat, but in engineering, logistics, and survival. Their loyalty was fierce, often more to their commanders than to the Senate or emperor. A legion marched with order. Each soldier carried around 30 kilograms of gear, weapons, armor, rations, tools, and even stakes for constructing a nightly fortified camp. Every evening, after a long march, the army built a defensive perimeter, ditch, and palisade. Safety was never left to chance. The weapons of the legionary reflected Rome's philosophy of war: practical, efficient, and deadly. The gladius, the short stabbing sword, it was designed for close combat, thrusting through shields and armor. The pilum, a heavy javelin, bent upon impact so the enemy could not hurl it back. Combined with large rectangular shields, Roman soldiers fought in disciplined formations, advancing like a wall of iron. Rome's enemies often relied on valor, individual heroics, or sheer numbers. But the legion relied on discipline and coordination. 1,000 warriors might charge, but 100 Romans in formation could stand against them. Victory was not in brilliance, but in organization. Engineering as warfare. The Roman army not only fought battles, but it also built the world that sustained them. Legionaries constructed roads that stretched across the empire, linking Rome with the provinces. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," was not a poetic exaggeration. It was a logistical reality. These roads allowed troops to march quickly, merchants to trade widely, and governors to govern efficiently. Fortresses dotted frontiers. Bridges spanned rivers. Aqueducts carried water. The army's ability to build was as important as its ability to fight. To conquer was one thing, but to hold territory required infrastructure. Every hammer stroke of a legionary was an act of empire. Life in the provinces. Yet Rome was not only soldiers on campaign. It was also the daily life of its citizens, from the wealthy senator in his marble atrium to the shopkeeper selling bread in a crowded alley. The elite lived in sprawling villas, often decorated with frescoes and mosaics depicting myths, banquets, or scenes of nature. Their meals were elaborate, featuring delicacies from across the empire: oysters from Britain, figs from Africa, wine from Gaul, spices from the East. Dining was not simply eating. It was a theater, a display of wealth and culture. The common people, however, lived very differently. Most resided in insulae, apartment blocks rising several stories high, made of wood and brick. They were cramped, noisy, and often dangerous. Fires swept through neighborhoods with terrifying speed. Collapses were not uncommon. For these Romans, daily life meant long hours of labor, often for meager pay. Bread was their staple. The meat was rare. Entertainment and public games offered escape from hardship. Bread and circuses. If Rome was to keep its restless masses content, it relied on what the poet Juvenal called bread and circuses. Grain was imported in massive quantities, especially from Egypt, to feed the population. Distribution was free or subsidized, ensuring no Romans starved. But food alone could not quiet ambition, boredom, or resentment. For that, there was entertainment. The Colosseum, a massive amphitheater in the heart of Rome, held tens of thousands. Here, gladiators fought, criminals were executed, and wild beasts from Africa and Asia were unleashed upon the arena floor. It was bloody, brutal, but wildly popular. Elsewhere, the Circus Maximus echoed with the roar of chariot races. Factions. Reds, blues, greens, and whites were more than sports teams. They were passions that divided neighborhoods. Betting was rampant. Cheers shook the very ground. In these spectacles, the Roman people found not only entertainment, but also identity. To be Roman was to be part of something vast, something dramatic, something that held the world in its grasp. Baths, temples, and daily rituals. A Roman day often included time at the public baths. These were not just places of hygiene, but of social life. Pools of varying temperatures, steam rooms, and exercise yards allowed citizens to cleanse, relax, gossip, and conduct business. Even the poorest might pay a small entry fee, making baths a unifying institution across classes. Religion, too, permeated daily life. The gods of Rome were many, and their temples filled the city. Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and countless others received prayers, sacrifices, and festivals. Roman religion was practical, offering thanks for victories, blessings for crops, and protection for families. As the empire expanded, it absorbed new gods, blending Greek, Egyptian, and Eastern deities into its own pantheon. But by the 1st century CE, a new faith emerged from the eastern provinces. Christianity was spreading quietly. At first, it was mocked, even persecuted. Christians refused to honor the emperor as divine, setting themselves apart. But in time, their numbers grew, and their message of hope and salvation began to challenge the very foundations of Roman religious life. The dual nature of Rome. And so, Segment 4 reveals the dual nature of Rome. On the frontiers stood the legionary, armored, disciplined, expanding, and defending the empire. In the cities thrived the citizens, bustling through markets, cheering in arenas, praying in temples, or whispering in bathhouses. Together they made Rome what it was, not just a political entity, but a civilization woven of war, order, culture, and contradiction. Rome's power lay not only in conquest, but in continuity. The army forged the empire, but daily life sustained it. And yet, beneath the splendor and discipline, cracks began to appear, cracks that would grow until the empire itself trembled. Crisis, division, and fall. Every empire carries within it the seeds of its own decline. Rome, the mightiest of them all, was no exception. For centuries, the empire seemed invincible, its legions unbeatable, its wealth inexhaustible, its culture unmatched. But beneath the marble, cracks spread slowly, quietly. And when they widened, the empire that once ruled the known world began to unravel. The 3rd century crisis, an empire in turmoil. The first great shock came in what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, 235 to 284 CE. For nearly 50 years, Rome was torn apart by internal chaos. The causes were many. Leadership instability. Between 235 and 284, Rome saw more than 20 emperors, most of them military men who seized power by force and were quickly assassinated or overthrown. The throne became a prize for generals, not a seat of stability. Economic collapse. To fund endless wars and buy loyalty, emperors debased the coinage. Silver was replaced with cheap alloys, leading to rampant inflation. Ordinary Romans saw their savings evaporate. Trade declined, and trust in the economy faltered. Barbarian invasions. Germanic tribes pressed hard against Rome's northern frontiers, while in the east, the rising Sasanian Empire of Persia challenged Roman supremacy. Borders, once secure, became fragile lines of defense. Plague and famine. Epidemics swept through provinces, killing soldiers and civilians alike. The empire's population declined, shrinking its tax base and weakening its armies. The Rome of the 3rd century was not the confident juggernaut of Caesar or Augustus. It was a wounded empire, struggling to hold itself together. Diocletian and the Tetrarchy, holding back the tide. Amid this turmoil rose one of Rome's most remarkable emperors, Diocletian, r. 284 to 305. Unlike many of his predecessors, Diocletian grasped the depth of Rome's crisis and set about restructuring the empire. His solution was bold: the Tetrarchy, ruled by 4. Recognizing that one man could not possibly govern the vast Roman world, Diocletian divided power between 2 senior emperors, Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, Caesars. Each ruled a portion of the empire, ensuring quicker responses to threats and more manageable governance. Diocletian also reformed the economy. He issued the Edict on Maximum Prices in 301 CE, attempting to curb inflation by fixing prices on goods and wages. Though the edict largely failed in practice, it symbolized the empire's attempt to wrestle with economic collapse. He reorganized the army, strengthening defenses along the frontiers, and launched campaigns to repel invaders. And yet, Diocletian's most enduring legacy was perhaps his persecution of Christians. Seeing their refusal to worship the emperor as a threat to unity, he ordered one of the harshest crackdowns in Roman history. Many Christians were executed, imprisoned, or forced to renounce their faith. Ironically, instead of eliminating Christianity, Diocletian's actions only strengthened its resilience. By the time Diocletian retired in 305 CE, a rare event for a Roman emperor, the empire had regained some stability. But his division of power set a precedent that would shape Rome's fate. Constantine and the shift eastward. The next great figure was Constantine the Great, r. 306 to 337. Rising from civil wars that followed Diocletian's retirement, Constantine re-established one-man rule. Constantine made 2 monumental decisions that forever changed the course of Roman history. The Christian Empire. In 313 CE, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance throughout the empire. No longer would Christians live in fear. Their faith was legalized and soon favored. Constantine himself converted, though perhaps not entirely out of piety, but as a political unifier. Christianity, once persecuted, now found imperial backing. Over time, it would become Rome's official religion. The new capital. In 330 CE, Constantine founded Constantinople, modern Istanbul, on the site of Byzantium. Strategically located between Europe and Asia and protected by natural defenses, Constantinople became the jewel of the East. As Rome itself declined, Constantinople would shine for 1,000 years as the capital of the Byzantine Empire. Constantine's reign marked a transformation. The Rome of the Caesars, pagan, centered in Italy, devoted to old traditions, was giving way to a Christian empire centered in the East. The Western Empire weakens. After Constantine, the empire was increasingly divided between East and West. The Eastern Empire, with its wealthy cities, strong trade routes, and defensible position, prospered. The Western Empire, however, was plagued by decline. Several forces eroded the West's strength. Economic decay. Agriculture faltered, cities shrank, and the Western treasury ran dry. Military dependence. Rome increasingly relied on mercenaries and foederati. Germanic tribes were hired to fight for Rome. These soldiers often had little loyalty to the empire. Political corruption. Weak emperors and power-hungry generals undermined stability. Few Western emperors commanded the respect or ability to restore order. By the 4th and 5th centuries, barbarian tribes were no longer just raiding the empire. They were settling inside it. The Goths, Vandals, Franks, and others became both allies and enemies, sometimes defending Rome, sometimes plundering it. The sack of Rome, a world shocked. In 410 CE, the unimaginable happened. Rome itself, once thought untouchable, that was sacked. The Visigoths, led by Alaric, marched on the Eternal City. After years of tension, broken promises, and mistreatment by Roman officials, the Visigoths laid siege. When the gates were finally breached, they poured into Rome. For 3 days, the city that had ruled the known world was plundered. Temples, palaces, and homes were looted. Though not destroyed, the psychological impact was devastating. Saint Jerome, living in Bethlehem at the time, wrote in anguish. The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken. The sack of 410 shattered the illusion of Rome's invincibility. The fall of the Western Empire. The 5th century was a slow collapse. One by one, provinces slipped from Roman control. Britain, abandoned by Roman troops around 410, left to fend off Saxon raiders. Gaul and Spain, overrun by Franks, Vandals, and Visigoths. North Africa was seized by the Vandals in 439, depriving Rome of vital grain supplies. Meanwhile, in the heart of Europe, new threats emerged. The Huns, led by the fearsome Attila, ravaged the empire in the mid-5th century. Though Rome managed to check his advance at the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains in 451, the devastation further weakened the West. Finally, in 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire came to its symbolic end. The Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustus, a boy of perhaps 16. No armies marched in his defense, no legions rallied. Rome's western throne, once occupied by Augustus, Trajan, and Marcus Aurelius, was no more. The Eastern Empire survives. It is important to remember, the fall of Rome was not the end of Rome everywhere. The Eastern Roman Empire, with its capital at Constantinople, endured for nearly 1,000 years more. Known to us as the Byzantine Empire, it preserved Roman law, culture, and Christian faith until its own fall to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. Thus, while the Western Empire crumbled in the 5th century, Rome itself did not vanish. It transformed, evolved, and lived on in Byzantium, in the Catholic Church, in European law, in languages, and in the very idea of empire. Why did Rome fall? Historians have debated this question for centuries. Was it the barbarian invasions? Economic decline? Political weakness? Religious transformation? In truth, Rome fell not for one reason, but for many, like a great ship taking on water from every side until it sank. The empire had stretched too far, relied too heavily on fragile systems, and faced too many enemies both within and without. Its fall was not sudden, but gradual, a slow fading of power. The Roman Empire did not collapse in a single day, nor even in a single century. It transformed, splintered, and lingered in different forms. But for those who lived through its decline, the sack of Rome, the retreat of legions, the loss of lands, the fall was real, painful, and irreversible. Rome, once mistress of the world, had become history, Rome's enduring legacy. When the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed in 476 CE, it might have seemed to contemporaries that the glory of Rome was gone forever. The Eternal City had been humbled, its emperors dethroned, and its provinces carved away by so-called barbarian kings. Yet, history does not end with the fall of a city, nor does culture vanish with the lowering of a banner. Rome's story was not simply one of rise and fall. It was also a story of survival and transformation. To speak of Rome's legacy is to speak of the very foundations of the world we live in today. From laws and languages to architecture, religion, and political thought, Rome cast a shadow so long that, even now, nearly 2,000 years later, we still live within it. Let us walk carefully through these legacies, tracing how Rome endures, not only in ruins and memory, but in the daily lives of those who came after. Law, Rome's invisible empire. Perhaps the most enduring gift of Rome was not its monuments or armies, but its laws. Roman law was not static. It was a system built and refined over centuries. Early on, there were the 12 tables, engraved laws displayed in the Forum around 450 BCE. They established a crucial principle. Law was not the secret weapon of elites, but a public standard that applied to all citizens. This idea, that justice must be written, known, and accessible echoes in every modern constitution. As Rome grew, its legal system adapted to govern millions of people across diverse lands. Concepts like contracts, property rights, inheritance laws, and the rights of the accused were all defined in ways still recognizable today. Roman jurists coined terms like ius civil, the civil law of citizens, and ius gentium, the law of nations, applicable to all peoples under Rome. The latter was especially revolutionary. It suggested that law could transcend tribe, culture, and region, a universal standard for human conduct. When the Western Empire collapsed, the laws lived on. In the 6th century CE, the Eastern Emperor Justinian I ordered the vast body of Roman law to be codified into what became known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, or Justinian's Code. This compilation survived in monasteries and libraries and was rediscovered in medieval Europe, shaping the foundations of civil law traditions in countries like France, Spain, Germany, and beyond. Even today, when courts in Europe interpret civil codes, they are, in many ways, still speaking the language of Rome. Language, Latin, the mother of many tongues. If law was Rome's invisible empire, then language was its living voice. Latin spread wherever Roman soldiers, merchants, and administrators went. From Gaul to Hispania, from North Africa to the Balkans, local dialects mixed with Latin until entire regions adopted it as their main tongue. Over centuries, as the empire fractured, Latin evolved. It did not vanish but transformed into the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. These languages still carry the rhythm, vocabulary, and structure of Latin, linking modern speakers to their Roman past. Even English, though a Germanic language, bears thousands of Latin words, borrowed through French and directly through scholarship. Words like justice, liberty, senate, emperor, and republic all come from Latin roots. The very structure of Western thought, how we form ideas, legal arguments, and scientific terminology, owes much to Rome's linguistic legacy. Latin also endured as the language of learning, religion, and diplomacy for over a millennium after Rome's fall. Medieval scholars debated in Latin, universities taught in Latin, and the Catholic Church used Latin as its sacred tongue until the modern era. Thus, while the empire crumbled, its voice never truly went silent. Architecture and engineering, building for eternity. Perhaps nowhere is Rome's influence more visible than in the stones beneath our feet and the buildings that surround us. Roman architecture was practical yet ambitious. With innovations like the arch, the dome, and concrete, the Romans created structures that not only awed their contemporaries but also endured across millennia. Consider the Colosseum, an arena that once held 50,000 spectators, where gladiators fought and emperors displayed their power. Its design, tiered seating, multiple entrances, and underground chambers, became a model for modern stadiums. Or the Pantheon, with its massive dome and oculus, still standing as one of the greatest feats of engineering in the world. To walk inside is to feel the weight of Roman ambition pressing upward into the heavens. Roman roads, stretching over 250,000 miles, were marvels of engineering. They linked cities, facilitated trade, and allowed legions to move swiftly across the empire. Many modern European highways trace the exact paths of these ancient routes. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," was not a metaphor, but a practical truth. Aqueducts carried fresh water into cities, sustaining urban populations at scales previously unimaginable. Public baths, fountains, and sewage systems revealed an empire deeply invested in civic life. These innovations set standards for urban planning that influenced cities for centuries after Rome's fall. Even today, the principles of Roman engineering live on whenever concrete is poured, arches are raised, or domes crown a skyline. Religion, from pagan pantheon to Christian world. Religion was another sphere where Rome's legacy left a permanent mark. In its early days, Rome absorbed the gods of Greece, Etruria, and countless conquered peoples. Temples to Jupiter, Venus, and Mars stood beside shrines to local deities. This tolerance helped integrate diverse provinces into the Roman system. But in the 1st century CE, a small movement from the eastern province of Judea began to grow. Christianity, at first persecuted, spread across the empire. By the time of Constantine in the 4th century, it had become the favored faith. Soon after, under Theodosius, it was declared the official religion of the empire. This shift was profound. Rome had provided the roads, infrastructure, and cultural networks that allowed Christianity to spread rapidly. The faith that began as a small sect eventually grew into a global religion, profoundly shaping Western civilization. The Church, centered in Rome, carried forward not only the message of Christ, but also many of the administrative structures of the empire. Bishops became new civic leaders. Church councils replaced senatorial debates. Thus, in many ways, Rome did not fall. It was baptized. The spiritual authority of the papacy became, for centuries, a continuation of Rome's central role in Europe. Government and political thought, republics reborn. Rome also bequeathed to us the language and framework of political thought. The idea of a senate, magistrates, checks and balances, and civic duty were Roman inventions or adaptations that deeply influenced later societies. The Roman Republic, though flawed and eventually destroyed, inspired thinkers of the Renaissance and Enlightenment. Philosophers and statesmen like Machiavelli, Montesquieu, and the founding fathers of the United States looked to Rome as a model, sometimes of what to emulate, and sometimes of what to avoid. The U.S. Senate, the Capitol building, and the very idea of a republic governed by citizens and representatives all draw from Roman precedent. Even the warnings about the dangers of tyranny, corruption, and concentration of power echo the lessons of Rome's decline. Rome gave the West not only its physical roads, but also intellectual roads, pathways of thought that guided future generations in their search for stable governance. Cultural imagination, Rome in memory and myth. And finally, there is Rome as it exists in imagination. For centuries after its fall, kings and emperors across Europe styled themselves as heirs of Rome. Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans in 800 CE. The rulers of the so-called Holy Roman Empire claimed descent from its legacy. Even Mussolini, in the 20th century, tried to link modern Italy to the glory of ancient Rome. Artists, writers, and filmmakers have never let Rome's image fade. From Shakespeare's Julius Caesar to Ridley Scott's Gladiator, from Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire to modern television dramas, Rome continues to fascinate. It represents both the heights of civilization and the inevitability of decline. Perhaps that is why, in recent years, a humorous trend emerged on social media. People marveling at how often men think about the Roman Empire. Beneath the joke lies a truth. Rome remains a touchstone, a mirror in which we see our own ambitions, anxieties, and desires for greatness reflected. The Roman Empire is gone, but its legacy surrounds us. In the laws we obey, the languages we speak, the buildings we inhabit, and the political debates we hold, Rome still lives. It is not just history. It is an inheritance. The story of Rome is, in many ways, the story of us.